The Kane mansion was a fortress of glass and stone, perched on the hillside with its tall windows reflecting the fatting sun. Servants moved about its wide halls in silence, their footsteps muffled against polished marble. Yet for all its grandeur, the place felt hollow, as though grief had carved out its center and left only shadows. The echo of hurried steps broke the quiet. Elena Kane, a little girl of 6, sprinted down the hallway clutching her worn, stuffed rabbit. Her dress was silk, but it dragged across the floor as if she didn't care. Her dark curls bounced with every angry stomp of her tiny feet. "Miss Elena, please," a maid pleaded, chasing after her. "Don't run off again." "I don't want you," the girl snapped, her high voice shrill with defiance. She darted past, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to shed. The maids exchanged weary glances. They were used to this. Every week it was the same story. A new nanny arrived with hope in her eyes, only to leave with her patience shattered. Some were dismissed after only a day, others after a week. Elena wanted no one. From his office upstairs, Alexander Kane watched the scene unfold through a tall window overlooking the garden. He leaned heavily against his desk, his broad shoulders hunched beneath the weight of both empire and sorrow. In business, he was feared and respected. Yet here, in his own home, he was powerless. The sight of his daughter, small and untamable, pierced through him. She had her mother's stubbornness, her mother's spirit. And every time she pushed someone away, it reminded him that he alone was not enough for her. "She needs a mother," his sister Margaret had said one evening, her voice soft with sympathy. But the very words struck like a blade. His wife, gone too soon, had left behind a wound that refused to close. And Elena, his only tie to her memory, seemed determined to live in defiance of every attempt at healing. The household staff whispered about it when they thought he wasn't listening. They said the child was cursed with loneliness, that she would never let anyone close. But Alexander knew better. She wasn't cursed. She was grieving. Still, knowing it didn't make the weight lighter. He rubbed his temples, closing his eyes. He was a man who could silence entire boardrooms with a glance, yet he could not silence his daughter's sorrow. A knock came at the office door. His butler, an elderly man with kind eyes, entered. "Sir, the agency has sent another candidate. She's waiting downstairs." Alexander sighed. Another one. Another poor soul who would last no more than a day under Elena's relentless rejection. "Send her in," he said tiredly, "but don't expect much." Downstairs, the great hall opened its arms to a woman who looked out of place amidst all the grandeur. Amelia stood near the entrance, her hands clasped in front of her, her simple dress neatly pressed. She had no jewelry, no airs of refinement, just a quiet strength in her posture and a softness in her gaze. Her chest rose and fell with a nervous breath, but her eyes held something deeper. At that moment, Elena appeared at the top of the staircase. She stopped, her arms crossed, her rabbit held like a shield. Normally, this was when she would turn on her heel, disappearing before the new nanny could even say hello. But this time was different. Elena didn't run. Instead, she stood frozen, staring at Amelia as though trying to place a memory she couldn't reach. Slowly, cautiously, she descended the stairs, her small feet echoing on the steps. Amelia's breath caught. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart ached at the sight of the girl. She knelt down, lowering herself so that she met Elena's eyes. "Hello, Elena," she said softly, her voice trembling with something unspoken. The little girl studied her for a long moment. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and tugged gently at the hem of Amelia's dress. "Read to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The staff gasped. Alexander, standing in the hall now, went rigid. He could not believe what he was seeing. His daughter, who rejected everyone, was leading this woman toward the sitting room, clutching her hand with the stubborn confidence of a child who had already chosen. For the first time in years, Alexander's heart skipped in something close to hope. The maid opened the door to the sitting room, her voice low with surprise. "She wants you to read, miss. This way." Amelia followed quietly, her heart thudding with every step. She had walked into grand houses before, but this one felt different. The Kane mansion carried a silence that was more than luxury. It was the silence of grief, heavy and unbroken. Elena climbed onto the wide armchair by the window, hugging her stuffed rabbit as if it might run away. Her little feet dangled above the floor, swaying impatiently. She reached out, handing Amelia a worn copy of The Secret Garden. "Here," she commanded softly, her tone more vulnerable than demanding. Amelia smiled faintly, sitting on the edge of the chair beside her. She opened the book, her voice trembling at first, but then finding its rhythm. The words flowed, gentle and melodic, wrapping around the room like a lullaby. Elena leaned closer, her head brushing Amelia's arm. The child who never tolerated anyone's nearness was now curling into her without hesitation. From the doorway, Alexander stood frozen. His sharp eyes softened against his will. For years, he had seen nothing but rejection in his daughter's gaze, the way she pulled away from every nanny, the way she buried herself in silence. But now, she looked content. His chest tightened in disbelief. When Amelia turned a page, Elena yawned and shifted, her tiny hand clutching Amelia's sleeve. Her lids grew heavy, and soon, to Alexander's astonishment, she fell asleep in the arms of a woman she had met less than an hour ago. The silence in the room deepened, but this time it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Alexander cleared his throat. "Remarkable," he said under his breath, almost to himself. Amelia looked up, startled. She hadn't realized he was watching. Their eyes met, his dark and intense, hers wide and uncertain. For a moment, neither spoke. Carefully, Amelia adjusted Elena against the cushions so she would rest comfortably. Then she stood, smoothing the folds of her dress, and faced him. I didn't do anything," she whispered, as though apologizing. "She just asked me to read." Alexander studied her, his jaw tight with questions he wasn't ready to ask. "That's more than anyone else has managed." His voice was low, weighted. "She has dismissed everyone, yet she chose you." Amelia lowered her gaze, her hands clasping in front of her. "Children don't always need words. Sometimes they just see something familiar." Her tone carried an ache she quickly tried to mask, but Alexander caught it. He tilted his head slightly, as though probing, but said nothing more. Instead, he turned his attention to the child sleeping soundly on the chair. His face softened in a way he didn't allow often, and for a fleeting second, Amelia saw the man not as a wealthy titan, but as a grieving father. "Stay by her side until she wakes," Alexander instructed quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. Then, with one last glance at Amelia, he left the room. Alone again, Amelia sank into the chair beside Elena, watching her chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. The child's small hand still clung to her sleeve, refusing to let go. And in that tender grip, Amelia felt the first stirrings of fear. Because she knew this connection wasn't accidental, it was blood deep. The little girl had found her, because she belonged to her. The mansion slept. The corridors, so vast by day, seemed endless now, the chandeliers unlit, their crystals catching only scraps of moonlight. Amelia lay awake in the small guest chamber that had been given to her. She could hear the wind pressing against the tall windows, the faint tick of a clock, the silence of a house that refused to forget. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling slightly. Her gaze fell to the pale scar across her wrist, faint now, but visible in the silver light. She ran her fingers across it absently, as though it were a map to the past she couldn't escape. That child, Alina. She had looked at Amelia with such instinctive trust, as though some invisible thread connected them, and Amelia knew why. She shut her eyes, and the memories came unbidden. The clinic had been sterile and quiet, its walls smelling of antiseptic and despair. She remembered signing the papers with a pen that shook in her hand. She had barely read the words, only the numbers, the money she would receive. Enough to pay off the debts her husband had dragged into their marriage. Enough to breathe again. Daniel, even the name brought a shadow across her heart. He had been handsome once, charming even. But the charm had rotted into cruelty. His fists had left bruises. His voice had left scars that words could not cover. She remembered one night, crouched in the kitchen corner while he shouted about the money he had lost. His hand had struck her, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. And later, his whisper, cruel and cold, "You'll fix this, Amelia. You'll find a way to pay, or I'll make you wish you had." The surrogacy had been her salvation. For 9 months she carried a life that was not hers to keep. She whispered lullabies to a child she would never claim, and when the day came, she had let her go. She had told herself it was better that way, that the baby would be loved, that she was simply a vessel passing on a gift. But as she looked at Alina now, years later, Amelia knew it had never been that simple. Fate had drawn her back into this house, back into the presence of the child she had once given up. Her breath hitched as the truth pressed against her chest. Alina wasn't just a little girl who needed a nanny. She was Amelia's flesh, her blood, her heartbeat walking outside her body. And if Alexander Kane ever discovered it, everything would collapse. Amelia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, shivering though the night was warm. She glanced toward the closed door, as though expecting someone to burst in and strip away her secret. "No one can know," she whispered into the dark. Her voice was almost a prayer, almost a plea. But somewhere in her bones, she sensed it. Secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply they are buried. And hers would not stay hidden for long. Mornings in the Kane mansion had a rhythm that Amelia began to cherish. The sunlight poured through tall windows, painting gold streaks across the marble floors, while the scent of fresh flowers in the drawing room carried a delicate warmth. Alina sat at the breakfast table, her curls bouncing as she spooned cereal into her mouth, humming a tuneless song. Amelia moved silently behind her, brushing back stray hairs with a gentleness that made the little girl lean into her touch without thinking. "Don't flick the cereal again," Amelia said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. Alina pouted. "I did." "You did," Amelia countered, brushing a speck off her dress. "But I'll let it slide this time." The girl giggled, a pure, airy sound that made Amelia's chest ache in ways she did not understand. Alexander, watching from the doorway, felt the same pang. He had seen children laugh before, children play, children cry, but he had never seen Alina this relaxed, this alive. Amelia's presence had a calm authority that no one else could command. She read to Alina in the afternoons, sitting cross-legged on the plush rug, her voice painting worlds far beyond the mansion walls. The child, who had once recoiled at every touch, now sprawled against her, her head resting lightly on Amelia's shoulder. Alexander lingered quietly in the hallway one evening, unseen, watching as Amelia tucked Alina into bed. The candlelight cast soft shadows across her face, illuminating something tender and unguarded in her expression. "How did you do it?" he asked once she turned to leave the room. His voice was low, almost hesitant, though it carried a weight that made Amelia stiffen slightly. Amelia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. I didn't do anything. She just trusts me. Alexander studied her, sensing a depth she wasn't revealing. He wanted to ask, to know, to understand, but something in her posture, the quiet dignity she carried, warned him that probing too far would break this fragile trust. Later, alone in the study, he poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid trembling in the crystal. His thoughts were tangled. There was something about Amelia, something familiar yet foreign. He couldn't place it, but the way Alina clung to her, the way the child's laughter filled the mansion, it felt alive in a way he hadn't felt since his wife died. Amelia, meanwhile, sat quietly in the small sitting room after Alina slept. She closed her eyes, letting the day's moments settle into her chest like a heavy but welcome weight. Holding Alina, seeing her smile, hearing her laugh, it was a joy she didn't dare let herself fully embrace. Because she knew the truth, and the truth could shatter everything. Yet, for the first time in years, she let herself feel a sliver of peace. A knock at the door startled her. She rose quickly, brushing the seat of her dress. It was Margaret, Alexander's sister. "She's taken to you remarkably," Margaret whispered. "I've never seen her warm to anyone so quickly." Amelia forced a small smile. "Children sense sincerity, that's all." Margaret studied her a moment longer, a curious glint in her eye, then left without another word. Alone again, Amelia pressed her hand to her chest. Alina's small fingers had left a mark there, invisible, but imprinted on her soul. And for the first time since she arrived at the mansion, Amelia allowed herself a thought that made her heart both soar and ache. She was no longer just a nanny. She was something more. But deep inside, a flicker of fear whispered, "Secrets always have a way of catching up." Amelia had thought she had left the past behind. She had thought the door to that life had closed forever, sealed by divorce papers and the long, lonely nights that followed. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was a bright afternoon when she left the mansion briefly to pick up groceries. The sun was warm, the streets bustling, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe. But the moment she turned a corner, her stomach lurched and her steps faltered. There he was, Daniel. He leaned against the cold brick wall of a small shop, his arms crossed, a twisted grin playing across his face. His eyes, once deceptively charming, burned with a dangerous fire. The way he looked at her made her insides coil with fear. "You thought you could hide from me." His voice was low, but it carried a venom that made Amelia's heart pound. "You thought I'd forget." She tried to step past him, quickening her pace. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice trembling despite her attempt at firmness. "From me, from her." Daniel laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "From her? Oh, Amelia, you've been clever. I never expected this. I found your little secret." Amelia froze, her shopping bag dropping to the sidewalk. What are you talking about?" He straightened, pushing off the wall, his tall frame looming over her. "That little girl upstairs in the Kane mansion, the one you've been reading to, comforting, holding, you carried her in your womb. You were their surrogate." The words hit her like ice. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She had never imagined he would track her down. She had never imagined the secret she had buried so deeply would be exposed in this way. "Stay away," she whispered again, more desperately, "or I'll call the police." Daniel's grin widened. "Call them. They'll believe you're innocent. But I have evidence, Amelia. And if I choose, I can tell Kane everything." Imagine his face, imagining that the nanny he trusts is the very woman who carried his daughter. Amelia's throat tightened. You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," he said, stepping closer. "And I will, unless you do exactly as I say." Fear coiled around her like a living thing. She felt trapped, The past she had tried to bury now clawing its way into the present. Her hands trembled, and the shopping bags lay forgotten at her feet. "You'll pay me," Daniel hissed. "You think I'll just vanish quietly, that I won't use this against you. You're mine, Amelia, don't forget it." Her heart raced. She had fought so hard to survive his violence, his debts, his anger. Now he held a weapon she could not defend herself against, the truth. Amelia turned, bolting toward the street. She knew she had to get back to the mansion, to Alexander, to Alina. But a part of her shivered, knowing that once this secret was out, nothing would ever be the same. And in the shadows, Daniel's laughter followed her all the way back to the gates of the Kane mansion. The days following Daniel's sudden reappearance were suffused with a quiet terror that Amelia could not shake. Every creak in the mansion sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to twist and leer. She moved through the halls with a careful grace, forcing a smile for Alina while her stomach churned with anxiety. At night, when she lay in her small room, she would wake to imagined knocks at the door or the sound of distant voices. The memories of Daniel's hands, his threats, his cruel grin haunted her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing at the corner of a street, waiting for her, waiting for the moment to strike. Inside the mansion, Alexander noticed her change immediately. Her once steady hands now trembled when she set the table. Her laughter sounded forced, echoing in a hollow way through the halls. One evening, he found her alone in the hallway, staring out a tall window at the distant lights of the city. Her shoulders were tight, her breath shallow. "Something's wrong," he said, stepping closer. His voice was firm, commanding. "You're hiding something." Amelia froze, spinning on her heel. I'm fine, sir," she said quickly, brushing off his concern. His dark eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me," he said softly, but with the weight of authority she could not ignore. "I see the tension, the fear, the way you flinch. There is something, Amelia. You can trust me, you must." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She wanted to tell him, to confess everything. The surrogacy, the debt, Daniel's blackmail. She wanted to tell him so badly her throat ached. But the truth was a double-edged sword. If she revealed it now, she risked shattering not just her fragile bond with Alexander, but the fragile world she had begun to build with Alina. I'm fine," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing." Alexander studied her, his instincts telling him otherwise. He had seen grief and deception before, but there was something different here, something deeply personal that Amelia carried, a hidden weight she could not release. Before he could press further, Amelia turned and hurried down the hall, her skirts rustling softly. Alexander stood still, a cold knot forming in his chest. He did not know the details, but he sensed the danger pressing in. A shadow he could not yet name, and he knew, without doubt, that Amelia's fear was not imaginary. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark sky, and in the distance, Daniel's silhouette lingered. He had begun his silent hunt, patient and relentless. The past was no longer buried, it was coming for them. Alone in her room later that night, Amelia pressed her hands to her chest, trying to steady her breath. The mansion, once a refuge, now felt like a cage. Every smile she gave Alina, every laugh she forced, was a mask for the storm brewing just outside the gates. And she knew with terrifying certainty that the storm would not wait. The storm had rolled in by nightfall, dark clouds swallowing the moon, lightning slicing the sky like a jagged knife. Rain pelted the mansion's tall windows, drumming an anxious rhythm that matched Amelia's racing heart. She had sensed it coming, a confrontation she had tried to evade, but could no longer escape. She was in the sitting room, tidying the scattered toys Alina had left behind, when the front gates banged open with a force that made the entire house tremble. Amelia's stomach sank. She knew that sound. Daniel. He burst into the driveway, soaked from the rain, his eyes wild, his breath ragged. Tell him, Amelia. Tell him who you really are. Tell him you carried his child. His voice was both furious and desperate, echoing across the grand hall. Amelia froze, clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The world seemed to narrow to that one figure, the embodiment of her past mistakes and present fears. Alexander appeared in the doorway behind her, drawn by the commotion. His sharp gaze took in the man storming the mansion grounds and then shifted to Amelia. Something instinctual, primal even, flickered in his eyes, suspicion, fear, and a sudden, terrifying awareness. Is this true? Alexander's voice was low but dangerous, carrying the weight of authority and disbelief. His dark eyes pinned her in place, demanding an answer she could not evade. Tears blurred Amelia's vision. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she remained standing, facing both men. She could no longer hold the secret, not with Daniel's fury and Alexander's piercing stare demanding truth. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. I was the surrogate. I never meant to deceive you. I only wanted to survive. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Elena's small figure appeared in the doorway behind Amelia, eyes wide, clutching her stuffed rabbit as if it could protect her from the revelation. Alexander stepped closer, his fists clenching at his sides. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman he had come to trust with the secret she had kept from him. Every smile Amelia had shared with Elena, every gentle touch, every moment of trust, had it all been a lie, or had it been something more complicated, something deeper? Daniel laughed harshly, his voice cutting through the tension. Do you see now, Cain? She's been hiding it all along, that sweet, trusted Nanny. She carried your child. Alexander's jaw tightened. Enough, he said, his voice like steel. I want nothing to do with your games. Daniel smirked. Games? No, this is just the beginning. She'll have to answer for this, or pay. Amelia's hands shook. Please, she begged, her voice cracking, don't let him hurt us. Don't let him hurt Elena. I did it for her, for you, because I had no choice. The rain streaked down the windows, mirroring the tears Amelia could no longer hide. Alexander's mind was a storm of its own, betrayal, confusion, and the faintest hint of understanding warring within him. Daniel, sensing the tension, stepped closer, but in that instant, Alexander moved like a predator, placing himself between Amelia and the threat. His eyes were a cold, unwavering steel. You will not touch her, he said, voice low but lethal. And you will not tell anyone else. Do you understand me? Daniel's smirk faltered for a moment, but pride and anger kept him standing. You can't stop me forever, he said, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and arrogance. Alexander didn't respond. He only stared, every muscle in his body taut ready. Amelia, trembling, pressed a hand to her chest, the truth finally free, yet the danger still hanging thick in the air. The mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield, and in that single storm-filled night, nothing would ever be the same. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered. Rain dripped from the mansion's eaves, pooling on the marble floors like scattered diamonds. Inside, the house felt heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and refuses to leave. Alexander stood in his study, packing the length of the room, the weight of the night's revelations pressing down on him. Every thought collided with another, betrayal, fear, love, and a quiet, gnawing disbelief. Amelia, the woman he had come to trust, the woman Elena adored, had kept a secret so profound it threatened to unravel everything. He ran a hand through his hair, fists clenching and unclenching. You should have told me, he muttered under his breath, the words sharp and raw. His voice carried the sting of hurt, the kind that burns deeper than anger. "Do you think I wouldn't have understood?" Amelia stood by the doorway, her figure small and fragile against the massive expanse of the study. Tears glistened on her cheeks, her lips trembling as she struggled to speak. I was afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Afraid you'd send me away, afraid she'd lose me again." His gaze softened for a brief second, memories of Alina clinging to Amelia flashing in his mind. The child's laughter, the way she curled against her in sleep, the trust she had chosen to give her, it all screamed a truth he could not ignore. But anger still simmered beneath the surface, a bitter heat that refused to fade. "You lied to me," he said quietly, each word deliberate. "You let me think you were just a nanny. You let me think we were building something on a false foundation. And all this time, you were hiding the most important truth of all." Amelia's hands trembled, and she took a step forward, then faltered. "I didn't lie to hurt you," she whispered. "I did it because I was afraid. I didn't want to lose her, your daughter or you. I thought I could protect both of you if I stayed silent." Alexander turned away, pressing a hand to his face. His heart ached, not just for the betrayal, but for the innocence Amelia had tried to preserve. He thought of Alina, fast asleep upstairs, oblivious to the storm raging below. And for a moment, he envied the child's ignorance. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked, his voice low, controlled but heavy with emotion. "It changes everything." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt you." He remained silent, packing, struggling to reconcile the warmth he felt for Amelia with the cold edge of betrayal. His love for Alina conflicted with the shock of Amelia's revelation. He had trusted her, perhaps too easily, and now he felt the fragile threads of trust fraying in his hands. From the shadows of the doorway, Daniel's presence lingered in memory, a menacing reminder of the danger that had forced her silence. Alexander's jaw tightened. That man could return at any moment, and Amelia's secret had almost cost them everything. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her. His dark eyes, sharp and piercing, softened only slightly, but the hurt was undeniable. "You must understand, trust is not given lightly. You've broken that, and now we must rebuild it if it's even possible." Amelia's shoulders sagged with the weight of his words. She had hoped for forgiveness, or at least understanding. Instead, she faced the painful reality that love, even when genuine, could fracture under the weight of secrets. The mansion, once a place of tentative peace, now felt like a house divided. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside, the storm lingered in every glance, every silence, every unspoken word. And for the first time since she arrived, Amelia realized that the battle for Alexander's trust might be harder than the battle for her own survival. The morning sun cut through the mansion's tall windows, illuminating a world that had begun to shift. The storm of the past nights had left debris on the driveway and puddles across the marble floors, but inside, tension still clung to the air like smoke. Daniel, confident in his ability to control Amelia, had begun to make moves. Calls, threats, and shadowed visits had become his weapon. He believed that fear alone could bend her will and manipulate Alexander Kane. But he had miscalculated. Alexander was a man accustomed to control, to seeing through deception, to dismantling threats with precision. Once he learned the full extent of Daniel's history, the gambling, the violence, the criminal entanglements, the tides began to turn. Private investigators Alexander had quietly employed delivered damning evidence, court records, police reports, witness statements. Daniel's reputation, carefully hidden behind a veneer of charm, unraveled like a delicate thread. One night, under the dim light of the mansion's driveway lamps, Alexander confronted him. The rain from the previous storm had left the ground slick, reflecting the glow of the streetlights in fractured patterns. "You wanted to use Amelia against me," Alexander said, his voice cold, measured. "You wanted leverage, but instead you've exposed yourself." Daniel's smugness faltered for the first time. You can't what?" Alexander interrupted, stepping closer, his presence imposing. "You can't manipulate a man who has already built an empire on strategy and foresight. Your threats don't scare me. Your lies don't frighten me. And your intentions to harm someone who has only ever protected herself and my daughter. That, Daniel, is your downfall." Daniel's confidence cracked, a faint tremor in his hands betraying the fear he tried to mask. The flashing blue and red lights of police cars reflected in his eyes as officers emerged from the shadows, handcuffs ready. "You'll pay for everything," Daniel spat, but his voice lacked conviction now. It was the cry of a man cornered, a predator trapped by his own miscalculations. The arrest was swift. Amelia watched from the mansion doorway, her hands pressed against her chest. She felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering fear. She had faced the ghost of her past, and now it was finally confined behind cold iron bars. Alexander stepped beside her, silent at first. The storm outside had cleared, leaving a stillness that mirrored the fragile peace settling within the mansion. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "It's over," he said, his voice soft but steady. Amelia exhaled, a shuddering breath she didn't realize she had been holding. I thought it would never end," she whispered. "It did," Alexander replied, "and we survived it together." For the first time since Daniel's threat had emerged, Amelia allowed herself to believe it. She looked toward the mansion, toward Elena's laughter drifting from the upstairs windows, and felt the weight of fear begin to lift. The danger had passed, but the consequences of the past remained. Amelia's secret was known to Alexander, their trust fractured, yet the bond they shared, fragile but real, had endured. Outside, the night was calm. The stars broke through the clouds, reflecting in the puddles like countless promises of a future yet to come. And Amelia realized, with a quiet certainty, that she was finally free. The morning light poured through the tall windows of the Kane mansion, soft and golden, painting the walls with warmth. The house no longer felt heavy with shadows. Instead, it breathed with tentative life. Outside, the gardens glistened from the remnants of the rainstorm, droplets clinging to roses and ivy as if the world itself had been washed clean. Amelia stood in her small room, bags packed and neatly lined by the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the straps, heart heavy with the knowledge that her place in this house was uncertain. She had survived Daniel, revealed her deepest secret, endured Alexander's disappointment, and now faced the consequences of the truth. She had no right to stay, no claim, yet leaving felt unbearable. A soft knock echoed at the door. Amelia turned, heart catching. Alexander stepped into the room, his expression unreadable but calm. "You don't have to go," he said simply. Amelia blinked, taken aback. I broke your trust. I lied to you. You gave my daughter life," Alexander interrupted, stepping closer, his voice steady and unshakable. "And now you've given her love. That is not betrayal, Amelia. That is a gift." Her chest tightened, tears threatening to spill. She had carried this child for another family, sacrificed herself for money, endured violence, and still feared her place here. And yet, this man, Alexander Kane, saw her not as a threat, but as someone indispensable. Before she could speak, the door creaked open wider, and Elena's small figure darted in. Her curls were damp from the morning's drizzle, and her eyes were wide, searching. She ran into Amelia's arms without hesitation. "Don't go, Mama," Alina whispered, the word slipping out naturally as if it had always belonged there. Amelia held her tightly, her tears finally breaking free. "Oh, my sweet girl," she murmured, rocking her gently. Alexander watched, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar ache, a mixture of love, relief, and admiration. He stepped closer, placing a hand over Amelia's. "Stay," he said softly, but with an authority that carried more weight than any command. "Stay with us, with her, with me. This house, it needs you, and so do we." Amelia lifted her tear-streaked face to meet his, searching the depths of his dark eyes. The walls that had divided them for weeks, fear, distrust, and the weight of secrets, seemed to crumble in that moment. "Yes," she whispered, a small, shaky smile forming. "I'll stay." Alina giggled, pressing her tiny hands against Amelia's cheeks. "Yay, Mama's not leaving." Alexander stepped closer, enveloping both Amelia and Alina in a protective embrace. For the first time since his wife's death, the mansion felt alive. Laughter and warmth filled the halls, no longer silenced by grief. Outside, the morning sun shone brighter, and the gardens glimmered with promise. Within the walls of the Kane mansion, a new chapter had begun, a life bound not just by blood, but by trust, love, and the quiet resilience of hearts that refuse to break. And as Amelia held Alina, feeling her heartbeat against her own, she knew, at last, that they had all found where they belonged.